Meseches Bava Metzia Zayin. The Gemara will quickly finish the sugya of what happens if someone grabs something or is makdish it. The Gemara will clear up the case of Safik Bechar, which was discussed earlier, and the Gemara will say what is the halacha l'maisa in the case of Mesusa, the bathhouse, the two people are arguing over. And then the Gemara will begin bringing brises to compare them to our Mishnah and see if they fit with our Mishnah, if they're different than our Mishnah, and how we can resolve them if there are any contradictions. So let's begin. The Gemara has mentioned before that there is a case of Sveikus Nechnasim L'dir L'Saser, a suffix can be used for Meiser Behema. That's if you have an animal which is a suffix. The Gemara will explain a suffix what. The simplest shot is that it's a suffix Bechar that it can be used for Meiser Behema. So the Gemara says, what is the case exactly? We understand that a suffix Bechar you get to keep. That if a Yisrael has an animal that's born to a suffix, if it's a Bechar or not, he doesn't have to give it to the Kayin Misafik because it might if the Kayin wants to take it, let him prove that it's a Bechar. And therefore it belongs to him fully. We've discussed earlier if the Kohen grabbing it would help, but it certainly belongs to him. And the question and the psak therefore seems to be that since it's fully his, he could use it for Meiser. It's one of his 10 animals he has to take Meiser Behema from. The question we're asked is, even though it's fully his, but it still has a suffix Kedushas Bechar. And if it has Kedushas Bechar, it can't get Kedushas Meiser. So the Gemara asks, the Torah says that Meiser Behema is Yiyeh Kodesh. It becomes holy through becoming Meiser Behema. That means it could not have been Kodesh before. It could not have been a Bechar before. So the fact that it's a Bechar should preclude it, the fact that there's a possibility that it's a Bechar, should preclude it from being able to be used for Meiser Behema. So the Gemara therefore answers, we're not talking about a suffix Bechar, we're talking about an animal, a sheep that was swapped for a suffix Bechar Chamar, a suffix pidyon peter chamar. That the halacha is that if somebody has a firstborn to a donkey, it can't be born as a carbon, but it still has kedushas bechar. You take that and you transfer that halacha to a sheep. That sheep does not have kedusha. It does have to be given to the kain as a pidyon for the chamar, but it doesn't have kedusha. Just like we have said, if somebody has 10 suffix chamars, suffix bechar of donkeys in his house, he could exchange it for 10 sheep, and they all belong to him because they don't have kedusha, and the mominus, no one could take it away from him because he is a chazaka. Okay, so that's what the case is. And we're now asked, what is the psak in the case of the bathhouse? We had two people who were arguing over a bathhouse, and one of them was makdishit. Each one said it was his. One of them was makdishit. The question is that kedusha chal on it because it's not fully decided that it's his? So the Gemara wants to show what happened. The Gemara says Rabbi Chia bar Oven had such a story, and Yeshiva Rabbi Chizda, and Rabbi Chizda had it by Rav Huna, and they discussed it, and they came out with the following psak based on something which Rav Nachman said. Rav Nachman said that any money which you cannot win in court, you cannot be makdish it. The implication is that if you could win in court, you could be makdish it, even though you didn't get it yet. You're not holding it, you could still be makdish it. If the court will give you part of it, then you could be makdish it, and that hektish will be chal. So the Gemara asks, is that true? But we have a halacha that if Reuven steals an object from Shimon, neither of them could be makdish it. Reuven because it's not his, Shimon because he doesn't have possession over it. Even though it belongs to him, it's not in his property, he doesn't have control of it. So you have to have both possession and control. So in this situation where you could get it from a psak by the Beis Din, you don't have control. It's not in your rishus, even though the Beis Din is going to give it to you, so how could you be makdish it? So our answer is this Mesusa, the bathhouse here, is talking about a bathtub which was built into the ground. We're not talking about a movable tub with legs or a barrel. Rashi says we're talking about one that was built into the ground. It's like an in-ground pool, and therefore it is karka. The halacha of karka is that if it's awarded to you, wherever it is, it belongs to you. There is no such thing as possession of land. Land possesses you. You don't possess it. And therefore, if the Beis Din is going to give it to you, doesn't have to be actually transferred to your rishus. It's in your rishus wherever it is. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to quote brises and compare them to our Mishnah. So the Gemara quotes Rav Khalifa bar Barava, who said a brise in front of Rabbi Avo. The brise discusses, similar to our Mishnah, two people that are fighting over a talus. So each one's holding part of the talus. But the psak differs slightly from ours. The psak here is that whatever is inside each one's hand. So let's say one has a grip of a foot of it, another has a grip of 2 feet of it. So they each get there's no discussion as to what they hold. What they hold is considered to be cut off the talus and in their possession solely and independently. The only thing that they're fighting over is what's between their hands. So in that example, so Reuven would get a foot, Shimon would get 2 feet, and let's say there's another 9 feet, so they would split that 4.5 feet each. And that's the psak. Now, Rabbi Avo heard this and he pointed upward to say, by the way, don't forget, they have to swear to Hashem. There is a shua that's involved. So this is similar to our Mishnah. You also divide it, and they also have to swear. However, our Mishnah didn't say that each one gets what he's holding in his hand. Our Mishnah said you just split the entire thing evenly. And if one is holding more than the other, this Bryce implies that one would end up getting more than the other. So how do you fit this into the Mishnah? So where it says that Rav Papa says our Mishnah is referring to a case where they're not holding anything of value. They're holding the talus by the threads that are hanging outside the weave. That's not called holding any part of the talus at all. It's still holding, so that you have to split it, but there's nothing to grip. There's nothing that you can be awarded due to the hold that you have. All right, now the Gemara takes this concept and wants to go a little bit further with it. So we've just said that what you're holding is considered to be severed from the rest of the talus and is being held independently by you. So Gemara says, so let's say you want to do a kinyan sudur. You want to give someone a handkerchief. By giving him the handkerchief, you take possession of something he wants to transfer to you. It's kinyan chalipin. Now the minimum size for a handkerchief to transfer kinyanim is it has to be 3 fingers by 3 fingers square. So let's say someone has a handkerchief and he holds it out to you. The instant you grab onto an area that's 3 fingers by 3 fingers, that's considered to be cut off and already independently of your hand. It's in your hand independently of his hand. And therefore it's already transferred to you. Even before he he lets go, it's already in your rishus, and therefore that is the moment at which the transfer of whatever you're giving him takes effect. And this is halacha. We can see from here that what's in your hand is considered to be severed from the rest of it. The Gemara asks a kasha from something that Rav Chizda said. Rav Chizda said, if a husband wants to divorce his wife and he gives her the get, but he's holding on to a piece, and he has a string that's attached to the get, and he's holding on to the end of the string. So the halacha over there is that if he could pull the string away, and rip the get out of her hand, she's not divorced because he's still holding the string. The Gemara's kasha is, but if she's holding it, it should be severed. We said that anything that's in a person's hand is considered to be fully his, is severed from the rest of it. So Kavklemmer here, where it's just a string that's attached, it should be severed from what he's holding. So the Gemara answers no. It's viewed as if he is holding it. The person who's holding something is viewed as if he's holding it, but it's not viewed as if the other person let go. You're holding it, but he did not let go. Now, in kinyanim, all you have to be is holding it. If you're holding it, it's yours. And the same thing applies to a kinyan sudur, which we said before. However, in giving over a get, that's not enough. The husband has to let go. As long as he's still holding, there's a connection between the two. It's not about her holding the get. It's about the get being severed from him, but her being severed from him. As long as he's still grabbing onto her get, the severance is not there. And therefore, the halacha is going to be different. Now, on that topic, the Gemara brings another halacha. Rava says, if the talus is made out of gold, you split it evenly. Says Gemara, what's a chiddush? Of course, why should it be any different if it's worth more or less? Either way, you split it evenly. The Gemara says the gold was in the middle. Right to the Gemara says, obviously, you still split it in half, and each one gets an even amount. The Gemara says, no, the gold was closer to one than the other, and you may think split it in the middle, and therefore the person whose half it falls in gets to keep the gold, and therefore he ends up with more value than the other one. You don't split it down the middle, you don't split it perpendicular to their grip. You split it from one hand to the other hand, or any other way that you can divide it, and they each get an even amount of the talus and of the gold. Okay, the Gemara brings another brisa which we'll compare to the Mishnah. This Mishnah is also talking about two people fighting over something that they're each holding part of, but here it's not a talus, here it's a shtar, a loan document that says Reuven owes Shimon $100. Shimon borrowed $100 from Reuven. Now, Reuven and Shimon are both holding on to it. The Malv and the Levi, the borrower and lender themselves, are holding on to it. Each one is holding a piece of it, and they're arguing. So the lender, Reuven, says that he wrote the document when he lent $100 to Shimon, and it was never paid off, and it's his, and he dropped it, and the Shimon came and tried to grab it away from him. But it's his, and therefore we should give it to him so that he could collect it. He can use it to collect his $100. Shimon says, no, you're right. It was written as a loan to me. Reuven did lend me $100. I borrowed it from him. I returned it. He gave it back to me. The shtar is now mine, because when you pay up, you get the shtar in order to make sure that you can't get collected from again. And I dropped it, and now he wants to grab it away from me. and he wants to use it to collect again, even though I paid him off already. So they're arguing over whoever will give the star back. It'll be worth $100 to him. Reuven gets it back, he'll be able to collect. If Shimon gets it back, he will not have $100 taken away from him by a collection. So what's the halacha? So we have two shittas, and then we'll have a secondary case with another two shittas. So a total of 4 psakim. The Gemara will explain each of them. So in this case, the Gemara says the machlokes between Rabbi and Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi says you mekayim the signatures. You bring proofs that the signatures are valid. It doesn't say what you do. The Gemara will have to explain. Shimon ben Gamliel says no, the psak is yechleiku. They divided, which means he has to pay half the loan. Now, the secondary case is if it fell to the hand of a judge. A dayan has it. The Gemara is going to explain that this case needs some explanation. It's a bit cryptic the way it sounds, but it says if it falls to a judge, then you should not let it go forever. Lo yetzia lamis, no one gets it back, which practically means that the borrower wins because he doesn't need to pay. Rav Yossi says it stays in its chazaka. So the Gemara is going to have to explain what each of those means. So let's start slowly from the beginning. So first of all, Rabbi said you mekayim the shtar. That implies that you prove that the shtar is valid, and then it's a valid shtar, which means you give it back to the malv, and he collects with it. So Gemara says, why should you do that? Our Mishnah paskin that they split it. So how come here we're paskening, according to the way Rabbi sounds, that the malva gets the entire thing and he can collect the full $100? So Rava answers as follows. No, the argument is whether the shtar needs kiyum, and therefore whether you could believe the leva, and therefore whether it's possible for him to get 50%. In best case scenario, the malva is going to get half. We're not saying he gets the entire thing. There's a possibility that he gets nothing, and that's because the shtar is not makuyim. So what Rebbe is saying is as follows. If the shtar is makuyim, and you don't need to bring any witnesses, it's fine. They're arguing over it, 50-50, no problem. If it is not makuyim, however, now you have a situation in which you have to prove that the shtar is valid, and you can't. So really, why should we trust that the shtar is worth anything? We should say that it's a completely useless shtar, and the malva gets nothing. Throw the shtar out. The only reason that there's even a conversation here is because the leva admits. The borrower admits that he did borrow the money and that it was a valid shtar. He just says it's paid off. So that's what the machlekes is. Rebbe says that you have to rely on the leva, therefore you have to take his word for it that he paid it. Since without the leva saying anything, you don't know that there's any loan that ever took place, you have to trust the leva fully, and therefore if he says he paid it, then he paid it and the malva doesn't get anything. So therefore Rebbe's psak is you have to show that the shtar is valid. If you do that, you'll get you 50%, the malva, and if you don't, you won't get anything. Now, Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees. He says, no, once the leva was masking that the shtar was a valid shtar, there's no point in keeping stars anymore. We already know that it's valid, and I don't have to trust the leva to say anything further that he paid it. I don't need kiyum stars, it's a valid shtar, and therefore we'll split it. So he says that you can split it under all circumstances. Rabbi says you can only split it if you have kiyum stars. Now the Gemara goes to the second halacha. Second halacha we saw was that if the dayan is holding it, then lo yetzi lamis, he keeps it forever. You wait till Elio at least. You don't give it to anyone else. The Gemara says, what is happening over here? Why should it be any different if it's in the hand of a judge? The Gemara answers, the case is where it wasn't found in the hand of a judge. It was found by someone else. It was found by a random guy. Not Reuven, not Shimon, not the Malva, not the Leva. Levi finds it, and when he finds the shtar, he sees that it's already mekuyim b'chisam. If it has already been to court, it's already been certified by the court. There's a stamp on it called a henpek, which shows that this has already been verified. So he finds a verified shtar. So now, what should he do with it? So now you have a machlekes between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yossi says, give it back to the Malva. There's no reason to believe that this shtar was ever paid off, because had the owner, had Shimon paid it off and gotten the shtar back, he would have torn it up on the spot. And therefore, assume that it wasn't paid off and give it to the Malva. The Malva can use it to collect because we know it's a valid shtar. And that the Chachamim say, no, you have to be afraid that it was paid off. And they would say it even in a case where it was not Mekuyim. If it's not Mekuyim, if it doesn't have a henpek, they would say it's for sure then you're not going to give it to the Malva, because maybe maybe the loan was never made, maybe the shtar was written, maybe there was intent to make a loan, they wrote a shtar and they never did. You have no evidence that the loan was ever made. Here, where it was certified, you don't have that concern. Even there, the Chachamim would say, give it back to the Leva, or don't give it to anybody, because you can't give it to the Malva, because you have to be afraid that it was paid, and therefore the Leva is the muhsik on his money, you can't take his money away from him. So I think Gemara wants to know, okay, so then you're saying that Rav Yossi says there's no possibility that it was paid, you could give it to the Malva and he could collect with it. We have a brayso that seems to say the opposite. Brisa says, what if somebody finds a ksuba in the street? Now, in case the ksuba is written where the husband is promising money to his wife after the end of the marriage, after he divorces her or after he dies, is Yarshman going to pay it? So the malva, so the husband here counts as the leva, and the woman counts as the malva because she's using this ksuba to collect money from her husband. And the question is, who should he give this to? Should he give it to the wife? Should he give it to the malva? Should he give it to the husband? Should he give it to the leva? The parallel of what the leva would be. So the Brisa passes as follows: brings two shittas, Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim, both agree that if the husband is dead already or divorced her already, so the marriage is over and the time for payment has arrived, both agree that you can't return it to the woman because she may have gotten paid already. The machlokes is, what if it's early? So if the husband's still married to her, is it possible that he paid it already? So the Chacham don't say anything about that case. Rabbi Yossi says in such a case, no one pays early, so you have to assume it wasn't paid yet. You can give it back to the Isha. Now, the Kashas, Rabbi Yossi clearly says, though, that in a case where the payment is due, you can't give it back to the woman because you have to be afraid that she was paid already. And he doesn't say like he says here that the Malva must not have been paid because the Lev would have torn up the shtar already. So how come we don't see here the husband would have torn up the shtar already? So the Gemara therefore tries a few ways to answer this, and this is going to be a lengthy discussion. So the Gemara first says, okay, so switch the opinions of Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim in the first brisa. Rabbi Yossi is the one who says that you can't give it back to the Malva, you have to keep it because we're afraid that it was paid off already. And the Chachamim say, no, it's b'chaskasa, you can give it back to him and it's no problem. So you see, in both circumstances, Rabbi Yossi is afraid that it was paid, so it fits. Versus, but then Sakash the Chachamim and the Chachamim. In this new brisa, the Chachamim also agree that if it's due, you can't give it back to the woman because we're afraid she collected already. So how does that fit with what they say in our brisa, where they say that it's b'chaskasa, and you are allowed to give it back. You don't have to be afraid that it's collected already. So the Gemara therefore says we're going to reread this second brisa. It's all Rabbi Yossi. There's no Rabbanan. And you have to add in a few lines, and Rabbi Yossi is just explaining himself as a chasuri mechsera. And it reads as follows. If the Baal is not moide, that it's her ksuba, you can't give it back not to her and not to him. That's talking, says Rabbi Yossi now, when she was already divorced or widowed, and therefore we're afraid that it was paid already, so you can't give it back to her. However, if she is still married to her husband, you're allowed to give it back, because Rabbi Yossi says as long as she's married to her husband and she's not widowed, she's not divorced, you don't have to be afraid to give it back to her because she definitely wasn't paid yet. When does he say not? That's only if she was already widowed or divorced. So it's all Rabbi Yossi speaking. There is no shitas chachamim here, so there's no stira. Now the Gemara's second answer is given by Rav Papa. Rav Papa says you don't have to change it around. You could leave it the way it was. Rabbi Yossi is the one who holds that we're not choishish that it was paid already. You could return it to the Malva, you could return it to the woman, no problem. Here, therefore, he says you could give it to the woman and no issues. However, the reason why he phrases it this way is because he says, according to the Rabbanon, you should at least make an exception in a situation where she's still married to her husband. Meaning, he's saying as follows. According to me, it makes no difference whether she's married or she's not married. Either way, you could return it to the woman because we're not afraid that it was paid already. However, according to you, the Rabbanon, that you say that once the ksuba is due and payable, you can't give it back to the woman. So you should at least agree to me that if before the ksuba is due, that as well as still married, nobody pays the ksuba early, that you should be able to return it to the woman because it hasn't been paid yet. And on that, the Rabbanon say, no, actually, we don't agree with you. The reason we don't agree with you is because even though they don't pay, sometimes they will set aside money and they'll put it wrapped up to be paid, and that money has already been given over to control of someone who's going to pay her. And therefore, if you give it back to her, then she'll be able to collect again besides that. Now, the third answer is Ravina. Ravina says no. The concern here is something else. The concern is not that it was paid or not paid. The concern is that maybe the husband wrote her another shtar. Maybe he replaced the ksuba for her, and he already gave her another ksuba. If you're going to give her this ksuba, she's going to collect twice, because she'll have another ksuba. You're right. Rabbi Yossi here holds that we're not chayshish that it was paid already. But we are chayshish that she already has a second ksuba. Now, the Gemara brings a machlekes. What happens if they're each holding a different significant part of the shtar? What happens if one is holding the toifes, which is the general language of the shtar, which is the same in every shtar, and the other one is holding the toiref, which is what is specific to this shtar, the name, the place, the date. So Rabbi Elazar says if one of them is holding the toifes and one of them is holding the toiref, each one gets the one that he's holding. You don't split it evenly. The Gemara will explain soon what the significance of that is. So Yochanan says, you always split it evenly, even if one is holding the toifes and one is holding the toiref. Says the Gemara, how does it feel with the brisa we quoted earlier? When they're holding a talis, each one gets what he's holding. How come we don't say the same thing here? So Gemara says, because the toiref, which is the valuable part, is in the middle. And he's not arguing. He's just saying, since the toiref is in the middle, you split it evenly. If one of them would be holding the toifes and one of them holding the toiref, then you would split it the same way. So he's really saying the same halacha. Smar says, what's the significance of the fact that if a toiref is in the middle, you split it evenly? Certainly you do. My answer is like we said before about the talis with the gold in the middle, that it's closer to one of them. And you would have said, split it down the middle. Kamashmani, you split it from end to end. Now, what is the significance of holding the toiref? The Gemara explains it's more valuable because it includes the date. A shtar that has the date on it, you can collect from property that has been sold, because you can prove that this property is sold after the loan was made, and therefore the buyer accepted responsibility. He bought property with a lien on it. If, however, you don't have a date on it, you can't collect from anything with a shibud. Therefore, the one that has the date is worth more. A shtar with a date is worth more than a shtar without a date, so the date has value. So what you'll do is you'll calculate it as follows. You'll evaluate how much the date is worth. What is the difference between a shtar with a date and a shtar without a date? The one who's holding the toiref gets that amount. The rest of the value of the shtar, you'll split evenly. Now, the Gemara had asked, when we said originally what was the significance of it, you thought you ripped the paper in half. What's a piece of paper worth? You're going to use it to stuff your bottle. So where it says, all the divisions we said are all talking about money. You never actually cut the thing in half. And the Gemara is going to try to prove this, so it'll take a bit of effort. So the first wants to say, you don't cut a talus in half, in case of Shaim Echsim Talus. What's half a talus for? The Gemara says, no, it's still valuable. You could use it for children. Versus what about Rava's case about the golden talus? It's not going to be worth anything if you cut it in half. You're not going to give that to a kid. The Gemara says, yeah, you could give it to the son of a king. Then the Gemara says, what about that? We said about two people riding on an animal. You're not going to cut the animal in half. If it was a kosher animal, maybe you will. You'll shecht it and you'll literally divide the meat. But if it's a non-kosher animal, you're going to have no value if you cut it in half, and therefore it has to be talking about for the money. That's how you split it. So here also we're also talking about the money.